если кем-то принято решение уничтожить Россию. Да, для человечества это будет глобальная катастрофа. Мы никогда не применяли ядерного оружия. Тогда хочу задаться вопросом, а зачем нам такой мир, если там не будет России? Этот маяк – интересы Российской Федерации и его народа.
Еще 50 лет назад Ленинградская улица меня научила одному правилу. Если драка неизбежна, бить надо первым.
This is a premeditated attack. Vladimir Putin has been planning this for months, as we've been saying all along.
If a fight is inevitable, throw the first punch.
Днем Великой Победы! Ура!
This statement was made in 2015 by Vladimir Putin, whom the world today describes as a killer.
Если драка неизбежна, бить надо первым.
We are witnessing this statement coming to life. We are experiencing one of the biggest crises of the 21st century. While the world is already on edge, now it is shaken by the Ukraine-Russia war. A war that is said And the most curious question is this: what exactly does Russia, or according to many, Putin, want from Ukraine?
Welcome to Unfair World. On this channel, I will show you the dark side of the world and the reality behind closed doors with theories that are very likely to be true. If you have a very ordinary life, you can join me on this journey by following me and liking the videos. Enjoy watching.
The roots of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine go back very far, and both nations trace their origins to the same historical foundation known as Kievan Rus. This early East Slavic state, centered around Kiev, is considered the cultural birthplace of both modern Russia and Ukraine. For this reason, Russian President Vladimir Putin often refers to Russians and Ukrainians as one people, emphasizing a shared identity that dates back centuries. During the 17th century, most of the territory that makes up present-day Ukraine became part of the Russian Empire. Over time, Ukraine was not only politically absorbed into this empire, but also culturally influenced, as the Russian language spread and administrative control became increasingly centralized in Moscow. After the collapse of the empire in 1917, Ukraine briefly experienced independence, but this period was short-lived, as it was soon brought back under control by forces loyal to Soviet Russia. In 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was established as one of the most powerful states in the world. Ukraine was one of its key republics, not only because of its population, but also due to its economic and strategic importance. With fertile agricultural lands, Ukraine became known as the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, producing vast quantities of grain. At the same time, its eastern regions developed into major industrial hubs, supporting heavy industry and military production. For nearly 70 years, Ukraine and Russia functioned as parts of a single political and economic system. Their populations were deeply interconnected, and cultural ties remained strong. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, 15 independent states emerged, including Ukraine. However, while political borders changed overnight, the deep cultural and historical connections between the people did not disappear. At the time of the collapse, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev himself symbolized this shared identity, as he had both Ukrainian and Russian roots. For many Russians, Ukraine's independence felt unnatural, almost as if a part of their own country had been separated. Among those who felt this most strongly was Vladimir Putin, a former intelligence officer who rose through the ranks in post-Soviet Russia. In his view, the Soviet Union had been a unified whole, and its collapse left millions of Russians outside their homeland. He later described this event as the greatest geopolitical disaster of the century. After the collapse, Russia attempted to maintain influence over former Soviet states through the Commonwealth of Independent States, but Ukraine did not fully align with Moscow and gradually began turning toward the west. At this point, geography started to play a decisive role. Ukraine is located on the vast Eurasian Plain, a flat and open landscape with very few natural defensive barriers. This geography has historically made the region a pathway into invasions for Russia, as seen in the campaigns of Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler, both of whom advanced through these plains toward Russian territory. Because of this historical experience, Russian strategic thinking has long emphasized the importance of buffer zones. The greater the distance between potential enemies and Moscow, the more secure Russia feels. From this perspective, Ukraine is not simply a neighboring country, but a critical defensive shield. Losing influence over Ukraine would mean exposing the Russian heartland to potential threats. During the 1990s, this issue had not yet escalated into a full crisis. Ukraine still maintained significant ties with Russia and remained within its sphere of influence to some extent. At the same time, Ukraine inherited a large nuclear arsenal from the Soviet Union, making it the third largest nuclear power in the world. However, this changed with the Budapest Memorandum, under which Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security assurances from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. This decision would later become one of the most controversial strategic choices in modern history. Meanwhile, NATO, originally formed in 1949 to counter the Soviet Union, began expanding eastward after 1991. Former Eastern Bloc countries joined the alliance one by one, bringing NATO closer to Russia's borders. From Moscow's perspective, this expansion appeared as a form of encirclement and posed a serious security concern. When Putin came to power in 2000, he gradually rebuilt Russia's strength and began pursuing a more assertive foreign policy. Ukraine became central to this vision, not only because of historical and cultural reasons, but also due to its geopolitical and economic significance. Ukraine serves as a major transit route for Russian natural gas exports to Europe, and control over these routes provides both economic leverage and political influence. Energy, in this context, is not just an economic resource, but a powerful geopolitical tool. The internal divisions within Ukraine became increasingly visible in the Orange Revolution in 2004, when protests erupted over disputed elections. One part of the country looked toward Europe, while another remained closer to Russia. This division made Ukraine even more strategically important, as her direction would determine the balance of power in the region. In 2008, NATO signaled that Ukraine and Georgia could eventually become members, which alarmed Moscow. Putin strongly opposed this possibility and viewed it as a direct threat to Russia's security. To demonstrate Russia's willingness to act, he intervened in Georgia that same year, recognizing separatist regions and launching a military operation. This served as a clear warning to other countries considering closer ties with NATO. However, Ukraine continued to strengthen its relationship with the West. From Russia's perspective, this crossed a critical red line. If Ukraine were to join NATO, Western military forces could be positioned much closer to Russian territory, significantly reducing Russia's strategic depth. In 2000, Viktor Yanukovych was elected president of Ukraine and initially moved the country closer to Russia. However, when he suspended an agreement with the European Union under Russian pressure, large-scale protests broke out. These protests eventually led to his removal and forced him to flee the country. In the resulting power vacuum, Russia acted quickly and annexed Crimea in 2014. This move secured Russia's control over the strategically vital port of Sevastopol, home to its Black Sea fleet, and ensured continued access to the Black Sea. At the same time, conflict erupted in eastern Ukraine, particularly in the Donbass region. By supporting separatist forces there, Russia created a zone of instability that prevented Ukraine from fully integrating into Western institutions such as NATO. Ultimately, for Russia, Ukraine represents far more than just a neighboring country. It is a key element of national security, a critical transit route for energy, and a central piece in the broader geopolitical balance of power. The struggle over Ukraine is therefore not only about territory, but about influence, strategy, and the future of global power dynamics.
Заканчивается граница России.
России заканчивается через Берингов пролив с США.
Граница России нигде не заканчивается.
Ukraine is still not a member of NATO today. Even if it cannot change that, it continues to feel the consequences. So, what is the advantage of this situation for Russia? If you look at the map, you will see that the Eurasian plain has a funnel-like shape. As this narrow mouth expands toward Russian territory, it turns into a much wider area. Although Russia's vast land provides major advantages, it also creates serious challenges in terms of defense. Think of it this way. If an attack comes your way, is it easier to stop it at a narrow point or across a wide territory? Russia was aware of this. That is why it aimed to secure the narrowest part of this funnel. In this way, any real attack on its territory could be contained and controlled before spreading deeper inland. After the Soviet Union collapsed, newly independent states began joining NATO or moving closer to the West. This increased tension in Moscow. NATO was approaching Russia's borders from the western side. NATO is a defensive alliance. According to its rules, if one member is attacked, all members respond together. One for all and all for one. If you are living in Russia and believe NATO is a hostile military alliance, this situation naturally appears risky. And the reason behind this perception goes back to an agreement in 1990. According to Russia, NATO had promised not to expand eastward under the 2+4 agreement signed in 1990. At the time, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev stated that the United States had assured them NATO would not move beyond Germany. However, from Russia's perspective, NATO ignored this and began signaling expansion toward Ukraine. This provoked Putin. He believed action had to be taken before Ukraine joined NATO. If Russia could bring Ukraine under its influence, it could push its defensive line further outward toward narrower, more controllable terrain. With Belarus already aligned with Russia, geographical threats would be significantly reduced. This could allow Russia to regain strategic advantage against NATO. Moreover, by increasing pressure, Russia could potentially weaken NATO unity and even cause divisions within the alliance. However, in reality, this plan had the opposite effect. Instead of weakening NATO, it strengthened it. After the invasion, NATO became more united than ever before. We will go into detail on this later. So, we have seen the advantages for Russia if Ukraine is not in NATO. Now let's consider the opposite. What if Ukraine had joined NATO? If Ukraine were a NATO member, the situation would become far more complicated. For Russia, this was one of the worst-case scenarios, and Putin was well aware of it. In that case, the front line would extend far beyond buffer zones and reach directly to Russia's doorstep. This would not only create defensive challenges, but also threaten one of Russia's most critical strategic assets. Ukraine's border is only about 300 kilometers from Volgograd. If an invasion were to come from the western side, this would be one of the easiest access points. If Russia lost this region, it would effectively lose control over the Volga River, and that would be a disaster. Because the Volga River carries key oil and natural gas routes from the Caspian region. In case of occupation, this flow could be cut off immediately. For this reason, Russia must protect this area at all costs. If Ukraine joined NATO, Russia would find itself surrounded on multiple sides, and in the event of a conflict, it would have to defend a much larger front. That is why direct control over Ukraine, or at least ensuring its neutrality, is critical for Moscow. The idea of Ukraine becoming a future launch point for attacks is not something Russia can accept. However, this is only the visible part of the issue. Security concerns are not the only reason behind Russia's actions. What Russia truly wants from Ukraine is energy. Russia is a superpower when it comes to energy resources. Oil and natural gas are its most important strategic tools and its main source of income. Russia is one of the world's largest oil producers and holds the largest proven natural gas reserves. Revenue from these exports forms the backbone of the modern Russian state. Oil and gas account for roughly half of the government's budget. Russia has used this income to strengthen its military power. Over time, it also built large reserves of cash, gold, and foreign currency. In many ways, the Russian Federation functions like an energy state, similar to countries such as Saudi Arabia or Iran. These vast resources are not only important for Russia, but also for Europe, because Russia supplies a significant portion of the European Union's oil and nearly half of its natural gas. This energy flows to Europe through complex pipeline networks. For Russia, maintaining this flow is essential for economic stability, and for Europe, it is critical to avoid an energy crisis. Any disruption in this relationship would be a serious problem, especially for Russia. So, where is the most likely point of disruption? Ukraine. Ukraine acts almost like a bridge for gas transit. After gaining independence, Kiev began demanding billions of dollars in transit fees from Russia. In simple terms, if you want to send gas to Europe through our territory, you have to pay. Due to limited alternatives at the time, Russia had to accept this. This heavy dependence pushed Russia to look for alternatives. New pipeline projects were developed to bypass Ukraine. Projects like Nord Stream aimed to send gas directly to Germany and then to the rest of Europe. As a result, the volume of gas passing through Ukraine began to decline. Russia's long-term goal was to eliminate reliance on Ukrainian transit routes entirely. By doing so, it would both reduce costs and remove Ukraine as a strategic risk. Just as Russia was solving this issue, a new and even bigger challenge emerged. Ukraine appeared on the global stage with significant energy potential of its own. In early 2012, Ukraine made a discovery within its exclusive economic zone. If you're wondering what that means, here's the definition. A country has rights over natural resources within 200 nautical miles from its coastline. Since this discovery was within Ukraine's maritime borders, all rights belonged to Ukraine. So what exactly was discovered? Natural gas. And this is where things started to get interesting. Ukraine discovered around 2 trillion cubic meters of natural gas concentrated near the Crimean Peninsula. Now imagine this from Russia's perspective. For years, you invest effort. You launch multiple projects to reduce gas transit through Ukraine. Just when you think the problem is solved, Ukraine makes a massive discovery and everything resets. During this period, Ukraine didn't just find offshore gas, it also discovered another major energy source, shale gas. Studies revealed that Ukraine held around 1.5 trillion cubic meters, making it one of the largest shale gas reserves in Europe. So what would Russia do in this situation? After the discovery, Ukraine identified 2 major reserve areas. One of them was the Donbas region. The Donetsk area in the east and the Olesk field near Lviv in the west were found to be the richest zones. The Ukrainian government saw this as a huge opportunity, and it truly was. With these reserves, Ukraine had the potential to become one of the world's major natural gas holders. However, Ukraine lacked the technology and financial resources to extract this gas efficiently. So the government began granting exploration rights to major companies like Shell and ExxonMobil. Ukraine was on its way to becoming an alternative energy supplier for Europe, and this made its integration into Western systems much easier. But for Russia, this was a serious threat. It meant Europe could reduce its dependence on Russian gas. In other words, a neighboring country was becoming a direct competitor. Would Russia just sit and watch this happen? Of course not. Remember earlier when Viktor Yanukovych fled to Russia. At that moment, a critical move was already underway. In 2014, during the chaos of the Revolution of Dignity, Russia seized the opportunity and took control of Crimea. Russia has long claimed Crimea as historically its own. By taking Crimea, Russia also gained control of about 2/3 of Ukraine's coastline, and with that, it secured most of the exclusive economic zone we mentioned earlier. This was a decisive move. Ukraine lost around 80% of its offshore oil and gas reserves. It also lost billions of dollars worth of equipment located on the peninsula. Soon after, Shell and ExxonMobil ended their agreements and left the country. Ukraine was left in a difficult and isolated position. It could no longer develop its resources effectively nor resist Russian pressure. When conflict began in the Donbas region, the area richest in shale gas, Ukraine lost much of that potential as well. All of this eliminated Ukraine's ability to challenge Russia's dominance in Europe's energy market. Through strategic steps, Putin removed a potential rival. At the same time, he protected Russia's main source of wealth. And in doing so, he strengthened his own power. Because Putin is not far behind Russia's oligarchs in terms of wealth. Some intelligence reports even suggest he may be one of the richest individuals in the world. There are claims that his wealth could rival or exceed that of Elon Musk, though this can never be confirmed. After these moves, Putin established strong influence over both Crimea and the Donbas region. Although Donbas is not officially part of Russia, separatist forces there receive financial and military support from Moscow. As these events unfolded, Ukraine demanded the return of the nuclear weapons it had given up in the 1990s. Putin responded by saying he had not personally signed that agreement. In other words, the weapons remained under Russian control. At this point, Russia uses its nuclear capability as a form of pressure not only against Ukraine, but also toward NATO and the wider world. Ukraine has repeatedly demanded the return of Crimea, and that pressure continues even today. On February 28, 2022, Russia and Ukraine held negotiations in Belarus. Later, on March 10, 2022, their foreign ministers met again in Antalya. Ukraine demanded that Russia withdraw from all occupied territories, including Crimea. So the question remains, would Russia ever give up Crimea? And if it did, what would happen next?
Я хочу еще раз все-таки подчеркнуть это. Я говорил, но мне очень бы хотелось, чтобы вы меня услышали все-таки в конце концов. И донесли это до своих читателей, зрителей и пользователей в интернете. Но вы понимаете или нет, что если Украина будет в НАТО и военным путем будет возвращать себе Крым, европейские страны автоматически будут втянуты в военный конфликт с Россией.
Another critical dimension of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine lies in Crimea, not only as a strategic military location, but also as a region deeply dependent on external resources, especially water. Because after Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, it inherited a territory that was geographically connected to Ukraine, but politically separated from it. And one of the most immediate problems that emerged was the issue of fresh water supply, as a significant portion of Crimea's water had historically come from the North Crimean Canal, a system that originates in Ukraine and supplies water to the peninsula. When Ukraine blocked this canal following the annexation, Crimea faced a serious water shortage that affected agriculture, industry, and daily life, forcing Russia to invest heavily in alternative solutions such as infrastructure projects, water transportation, and drilling operations, all of which required billions of dollars. And this created an economic burden that Moscow had to carry in order to maintain control over the region, demonstrating that holding territory is not only a military decision, but also an ongoing financial commitment. Despite these costs, Russia considered Crimea too valuable to abandon due to its strategic importance, particularly because it hosts the Black Sea Fleet and provides access to critical maritime routes. But beyond Crimea, the broader geopolitical situation continued to evolve, especially in relation to NATO, as Russia repeatedly expressed its opposition to NATO expansion and presented specific demands aimed at limiting the alliance's presence near its borders. Among these demands were guarantees that NATO would not expand further eastward and that Ukraine would not
Конечно, потенциал объединенной организации НАТО и России несопоставим. Мы понимаем. Но мы также и понимаем, что Россия одна из ведущих ядерных держав. И по некоторым компонентам по современности даже многих опережает. Победителей не будет. И вы окажетесь втянутыми в этот конфликт помимо своей воли. И вы даже не успеете глазом моргнуть, когда будете исполнять